fulfillment to the prophecy that Samuel gave to these people. Enslaving them, taking them to war, getting them defeated, and still having his own way. It gave them the nations a king who was far more like other nations than they had ever imagined. This was one of their unintended consequences. Saul was exactly like the other nations. He just did exactly what they did. And it was a horrible thing. One of the things that we need to do as we look at how to apply this to our lives is we need to check out our motives. How are we living? Do we want to be like all the other nations? Do we want to be like all the other people around us? Are we living to keep up with the Joneses? You know, it starts off when we're children. It starts off when we're in high school. Do we want everything that everybody else has? Is that our motivation? Now, it's not bad to have things like everybody else has. If you're using them as a way of trusting God, if you're using them as a ministry. Do you want a new car? Why do you want a new car? New cars are not bad things to own. But do you want a new car so that you can keep up with the neighbors? Or do you want a new car so that you can take people to Sunday school that you can use as a ministry? You know, it's not bad to have an IRA. It's not bad to have a retirement plan. But are you using that retirement plan so that you no longer have to serve the Lord? You can just say, God, I don't need to trust in you anymore. I've got my money in the bank. You know, it's not bad to look like the nations. It matters what our motivation is. Well, there are some things when you look like the nations that are bad, but, you know, a lot of things that are all right. We need to look at our motivations. If we're looking at our security, you know, and in placing that in our government or in our economy or in our military or in anything, we need to know that is not all right. And God will answer our prayers. Do we want to be like the nations? Do we want things when we want them? You know, do we have to have it now? This is a problem. Now, God had said in Genesis, kings will come from Israel. Kings will come from Judah. You know, he is not necessarily objecting to having a king. But it was going to be a king on his time and in his plan and how he would set it up. I don't know how God would have set up a king in those days that would be better than what was going on. Maybe there would be checks and balances. Maybe they would, you know, instead of appointing the next son, they would go out and look for the, you know, a godly person, and that person would become king. I have no idea what God had in mind. But he told us that there would be good kings. David, Hezekiah, Josiah, and especially Jesus. He is our good king. You know, we object to kings in our life anymore because we're a very democratic kind of people and we're very independent kind of people. But we need to know that kingship is not a bad thing if the king is God and if the king serves God. No matter what kind of government you have, it's going to be bad if we're not trusting in the Lord. Kings will come from you. We need to know that waiting on God is better than settling. Are we trusting in the Lord? Now, trusting in the Lord, waiting on the Lord, doesn't mean that you just sit there and twiddle your thumbs. You know, it does entail some action. I think the best illustration that I know of this is in the book called Prince Caspian that C.S. Lewis wrote for little kids. And in it, Peter knows that he cannot defeat the evil king. The evil king has lots of men, lots of weapons, lots of training, lots of experience. He cannot defeat the evil king. But he also knows that God is on his way. Aslan, the great lion, who represents God in all of this, is on his way. And so they're going to wait. Are they going to wait by twiddling their thumbs and hiding out in their fortress? Peter says, no, God would want us to do something. And so he challenges the other king to hand-to-hand combat, thinking, well, you know, it'll delay things, it will slow things down, it's something that we can do while we wait for the Lord. If he turns us down, we will just have gained some time. If he accepts our deal, well, we might win. You know, who knows what's going to happen? But we have to do something while we wait for the Lord. But they were waiting on God. This is what we need to do. We need to wait on the Lord rather than settling for second best. Rather than settling for what we want when we want it. We need to wait for what God is going to do. One of the last things we need to consider is, are we cowardly? Are we brave enough to trust God with our futures? Are we brave enough to trust God so that when we give up some of our dreams, we will know that He's going to make them even better dreams? Do we have enough courage to do that? The Jews didn't. They wanted to be like all the other nations. They were worried about whether or not there would be a battle that they couldn't fight because they didn't have a king to lead them. They were cowardly. Are we being cowardly when we can't trust in God? You know, we need to plan for the future, but on the other hand, we need to trust in God. We need to raise our children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, as the phrase goes, but we need to trust God with our children. You know, we need to work on our futures and go to school and get an education and find a job that will suit us, but we have to trust God to make us happy. Or are we too afraid to do that? And we rely on our education, or we rely, on our kids taking care of us, or we rely on something besides God. We have to have courage. We have to have courage. Jesus is our Lord. He is our King. We do not live as Christians in a democracy. God does rely upon us, but He is our King, and we need to serve Him. And that implies that He owns everything that we have. You know, we've just taken 2 offerings this morning. You know, and it's not because that money is ours and we share it with God. It's because that money is His, and we're returning part of it. And we trust Him. He owns everything that we have. Our kids, you know, do we hide them in rooms and control their lives, or do we trust God with them? No matter what decisions you are making for your children, you need to know that the only way that things are going to work out well is if you trust God. You know, you can homeschool them and say, oh, this is, I think, the best plan for my children. But if you're trusting in your homeschooling to keep them safe and close to God's heart, that won't work. You need to trust God. If you send them to public school, and you're trusting the public school to raise your children, that won't work either. You need to trust God. Whatever it is, wherever we are, you know, God owns what we have. God owns what we have. He is good. He does not oppress us. He is willing to lay down His life for His children. But He does have different plans than we do. Jesus being our Lord implies security. But that security does not come from our relationships. It does not come from the money that we have set aside. It does not come from our government. It does not come from anything. It comes from an ongoing, repentant relationship with God. When we have that relationship with the King of the universe, nothing can touch us that He is not in control of. But nothing will help if we're not trusting in the Lord. It does imply that Jesus is Lord. It implies also that we need to have courage. I mentioned earlier, you know, the Israelites basically were making their decision based on cowardice. They were afraid. With Jesus as our Lord, we go into battle. We face our troubles. We face the things that happen to us, knowing that He's in charge, knowing that He has got everything under control, and that we need and can trust in Him. We live in very perilous times with very tricky lives. Whether you're 85 and wondering whether or not you will make it across the floor at 11 o'clock at night, like Ruby, no, she was 90, or whether we are kids and wondering what the future holds, and everywhere in between, there are things that are getting in our way.